Hello, and welcome to Seikahan Global Reactions. Today, a prime minister who says she sleeps 0 to 3 hours a night, and what it would actually take for a leader to rest. First, what happened? In one breath. A weekend update from Japan's prime minister set off a storm. On the night of July 20th, 2026, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi posted on X about how she had spent the 3-day weekend. In it, she wrote that since taking office, sleeping only 0 to 3 hours a night had become routine. And, on the final day of the holiday, she added, she had at last managed a full 5 hours of sleep. That one line drew an enormous response, split between admiration and worry, and the debate quickly crossed borders. Online, the post was received as a humble brag about going without sleep. But is that one label really the whole story? There are 3 questions worth holding on to. 1. Why did a post that, to her, was just a status update turn into a scandal? 2. Is a sleepless prime minister only her own problem? 3. What would actually have to change for a prime minister to be able to sleep? Let's take them in order. Let's look at what the post actually said. On weekdays, she wrote, she finishes the housework at the official residence, then reads policy documents from midnight until dawn. Over the holiday, too, she said, she was buried in final drafts and thousands of backed-up emails, working into the early hours of Monday. And on the last day, she wrote, she finally slept, a full 5 hours, then powered through a pile of ironing and mending in one go. Read in full, it comes across less as a boast and more as an ordinary account of a busy, long weekend. The reaction split sharply. On one side, praise. This is an honest leader who hides nothing about the grind. Someone giving the job everything she has. On the other, worry. Is she really making decisions for the entire country in that state? A concern about her health and her judgment. Voices across the ruling and opposition parties questioned it too. The opposition leader Yuichiro Tamaki said plainly that resting is also part of the job. The Prime Minister's office also had to respond. At a press conference on the 22nd, Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara, the government's top spokesman, said the post was not meant to reject work-life balance. He also stated that a post the Prime Minister makes from a personal account does not count as an official government record. And he said she intends to be selective about which documents she reads herself while carrying out her duties. The focus is shifting away from what the post meant and toward how the office and the party were actually organized behind it. Here are 3 pieces of context. First, a Prime Minister's Day. Japanese newspapers publish a daily log of the leader's movements, and it shows cabinet meetings, parliamentary debate, and briefings lined up minute by minute, morning to night. By that log, on 5 of the 7 weekend and holiday days this month, Takaichi did not leave the official residence at all. As this post accidentally revealed, a day spent inside is not the same as a day away from work. And in a system where government information concentrates at the top, the final calls keep flowing to her. Second, life at the official residence, the state-provided home attached to the Prime Minister's office. That home is treated as a private space, and for most past prime ministers, a spouse living there quietly handled the daily life. In Takaichi's case, her husband, a former lawmaker, lives with after effects of a stroke, and she has said in a public talk that she cares for him on her own. So her day is split 3 ways: official duties, housework, and caregiving. And a leader's health has repeatedly become a public matter here. One prime minister collapsed in office in the year 2000, another resigned over his health. A question of whether the government can keep running. Third, the link between sleep and judgment. Japan's health ministry guidance recommends at least 6 hours of sleep a night for adults. Research has long shown that chronic sleep loss dulls concentration, the speed of decisions, and the ability to gauge risk. This works regardless of a person's job or rank. People who truly function on very little sleep do exist, but the research treats them as extremely rare. Since a prime minister's work is a chain of decisions whose errors reach the whole nation, her sleep becomes a condition of the state's decision-making. Now, how Reddit reacted. The thread on r/World News drew more than 480 comments. One note before we start. The thread leaned heavily toward skepticism and criticism, and we quote it with that bias in mind. One line captured the dominant view. If the person at the top is cutting their sleep that far, that's a failure of leadership. It shows they can't delegate or build a team. The most common reaction was doubt about the numbers themselves. It's probably just exaggerated. That dismissive line came up again and again. Others cited research that people sleeping under 4 hours fall into microsleeps during the day, when the brain shuts off for a few seconds at a time. A more charitable read. Maybe she naps in the car or on a plane and simply isn't counting that as sleep. The sharpest criticism aimed not at her, but at how work is designed and at the culture around it. One commenter recalled a celebrated French general of the First World War who refused to give up his 8 hours a night, arguing that decisions over life and death demand a clear head. Another called it pure Japanese no-sleep bragging culture, where boasting about how hard you work is an expected part of small talk. And one noted the irony. Japan spent roughly 10 years improving working conditions after a young worker's overworked suicide at the ad giant Dentsu, and here was the leader modeling the opposite. Now for the core of this video. First, how did a status update become a brag about no sleep? Read in full, the post was trying to explain that she had worked through the holiday. There is no material to conclude it was meant as a boast. It became a scandal anyway because the force of one line, 0 to 3 hours, now routine, overwrote the entire context. A number she placed as a personal aside landed, for readers, as a statement about the conditions of national governance. That gap, in our view, shows that a prime minister's words are always read not as a private citizen's, but as state information. And note this, even the defenders have a point, yet almost none of them argue that the 0 to 3 hour state itself should continue. As weighty as the content is the fact that it was broadcast to the world. Governments and intelligence services treat a rival leader's health as valuable information to collect. So she effectively delivered, under her own name, the message that Japan's prime minister is chronically short of sleep. If the content is true, it raises questions about her judgment. If it is exaggerated, it raises questions about the reliability of her messaging. Either way, in our view, it was a post with little to gain. So did this post pass in front of anyone's eyes? Unlike official government announcements, a politician's personal social media sits, by design, outside any organized review process. The Chief Cabinet Secretary's line, that it is not an official record, is really a confirmation of that structure. Still, we can't cast direct messaging itself as the villain. A leader's unfiltered voice, reaching voters, is one of the real values of politics in the social media age. The issue is not censorship, but whether there is a system that asks before posting, how will this line be read, advice meant to protect her. Whether that advice never came or came and didn't stop the post cannot be checked from outside. That opacity itself, in our view, maps the current state of crisis management. On to the second question. Is a sleepless prime minister only her own problem? First, the sleep loss is also a result of how the office is designed. Documents from every ministry keep flowing to the final decision maker, answer prep runs into the night, and thousands of emails pile up. Leave that flow unchecked, and anyone in the job would stop sleeping. In fact, even within her own party, voices are reportedly asking whether she has aides she can truly trust and delegate to. When the Chief Cabinet Secretary mentioned being selective about documents, the office was, in effect, admitting the need to streamline the flow of information. At the same time, the person with the power to design that system is the Prime Minister herself. The idea that a leader's job is not to read everything, but to build an environment where she can decide in a sound state, is shared across business and military command alike. Next, the residence itself. A prime minister cutting her sleep to do the chores and the caregiving is too precarious to consume as a heartwarming tale. For most past leaders, daily life was held together by a spouse or family supporting it for free. What surfaced here is that this unspoken assumption no longer holds. This is not about whether a woman should do the housework. It is that the design cannot handle the ordinary variety of a single leader, or one caring for family, or raising children. You might think, just station staff there. But the residence gathers information close to state secrets, so an ordinary cleaning service can't simply be let in. It needs a vetted, dedicated team. And because the benefit goes to one person, it invites the charge of special treatment on the taxpayer's dime, making it hard for the leader herself to propose. Yet if a prime minister's health and judgment are a national resource, then life support isn't a privilege. It can be framed as crisis management, a way to keep judgment intact. There should be room to debate it not for Takaichi personally, but as a permanent system any future leader, whatever their family looks like, could use. The third question: what would it take for a prime minister to sleep? In truth, outsourcing the housework alone won't do it. Even if every chore at the residence were handled, thousands of emails and a mountain of documents would remain, so sleep hours would barely change. A useful comparison is the United States, where narrowing what reaches the president, the information in the meetings, is itself the job of a staff organization headed by the chief of staff. In Japan's office, that concentration of information is also the source of the leader's power, so it can't simply be cut. Define what only the prime minister can decide, delegate the rest, and except in emergencies, build protected sleep into the system. What's needed, in our view, is exactly that kind of patient design. 3 things to watch from here. First, whether being selective about documents stays a phrase or turns into real steps, summary systems, delegated authority. Second, whether a debate begins to treat life support at the residence as a permanent institution. Third, how the leader's messaging is run, whether it can keep the appeal of an unfiltered voice while letting protective advice through. More than the pro and con over the post, these 3 points, in our view, are what will decide what comes next. Time to wrap up. This post was most likely, to her, just an account of the long weekend, and dismissing it as no sleep bragging isn't fair. But if 0 to 3 hours of sleep really has become routine, that isn't something a sense of duty or effort can settle either. A prime minister's sleep is not personal self-management. It is part of national crisis management, the division of work, the checking of public messaging, and support for daily life. Think of it not as a story of effort, but as a question of system design. That, in our view, is the real issue underneath this storm. Finally, this storm holds a snapshot of how Japan works. In a society where working without sleep has long counted as proof of devotion, the person at the very top said she isn't sleeping, and opinions split. Most of the criticism is not an attack on her as a person. It aims at a question: should a culture that praises pushing yourself to the limit stay as it is? A country where a prime minister sleeping 5 hours makes the news, and a country that built a system letting its prime minister sleep 8. Looking back 10 years from now, which road we chose is, we suspect, the thing we'll be asked about. The full analysis and more reactions are on our blog, Sekahan. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.